Hello, and welcome to Returning to Base, a Mechwarrior Living Legends podcast. Today's topic is meta and playstyles. I am your host, Warlord Kentax, and here are my guests, Kidzin.
Hello there.
Leeko.
Greetings.
And Direwolf.
Hello.
I guess Kidzin, you can start out.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kidzin. I've been playing Living Legends for like a decade. I'm a Clan Smoke Jaguar member, long time as well. Kind of went through 2 iterations of it. I love and hate this game. I love and hate this community. You really should give that game a go if you consider it though. Yeah, that's about it.
And Leeko, how about you?
Hi there. My internet alias is Leeko. That is what people call me. I'm the community manager of Mechwarrior Living Legends, among a few other hats that I wear internally, with quality assurance and a few other things. And I'm also the de facto leader of Clan Jade Falcon. And I've been playing Mechwarrior Living Legends since December 2010, which is a very long time.
All right,
I think
the Direwolf.
Yeah. So yes, I am Direwolf. Not to be confused with Mech of the same name, and not to be confused with the other Direwolf in the community, who is one of the moderators on our Discord server. So Direwolf 2K, I guess. Hello. And unlike the other people here, I think I've been playing the least amount of time. So as of, I want to say, late 2018, 2017. And I mostly just play the video game. I'm a member of Clan Jade Falcon. I do some testing for the development team every once in a while. And I run events called Merc Nights once every weekend. Saturdays or Sundays, usually 2 train control events per month and 2 single life drops per month. We're basically just like, I have people show up on TeamSpeak. I make them all talk to each other, or as much as they can. And you play the video game. The train control games are usually like on a passworded server, so everybody who's in them has to be able to hear each other. They're all in the same TeamSpeak server. That's the only way they get the password. So games there tend to be a lot more like coordinated than pub games do. And I think it's a really good way to learn the game and to get the most out of what train control has to offer, like when played at the highest level, even if you aren't necessarily that experienced with the game. And I really, really love single life events. I'm sorry that Chaos March is no longer around, but I've been trying to fill in that gap by hosting single life stuff. You should show up. It's great. Community's great. Game is great. Constantly being updated. A good time.
So, meta. I'm sure a lot of players hear that phrase thrown around all the time. What does meta even mean? Do you all have a good definition for it?
Well, the metagame is the game of knowing the game. In other words, being savvy to the metagame requires having enough knowledge of all of the game's mechanics and how everything is balanced, and when to use what and when not to use other things. Stuff like that.
So, like, when it's good to use Osiris, and when it's good not to use Osiris.
Sure.
Yeah, that definitely seems about right. I usually just think about it, what's the strongest at given category, right? So for lights, mediums, heavies, assaults, and so on. Playstyles on certain map as well. So yeah, what does the best? That would be the meta for me.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much both I agree with both the previous. But I also think there's like an additional element of kind of maybe not what's the strongest overall, but rather what's best against certain other picks. Because like usually, there's just so many different niches and so many different assets and different types of weapons, things like that, that occasionally something will be very exceptional at a very specific role, say a long-range role, or something that's very good at, I don't know, pinpoint damage. And then the idea is that you realize, okay, this is what's a really strong counter to this particular type of asset and this particular situation. So do I want something fast? Do I want something really tanky? Something lots of pinpoint damage, something that's like good at dealing with pinpoint damage, like lots of screen shake, something like that.
Also, I know that we've got more than one game, sort of, in Living Legends. There's more than one game mode. We've got terrain control, we've got Solaris Arena, we've got Team Solaris Arena, we've got Test of Strength, which, even though it's usually just played on the testing server, is in itself a legitimate game mode that just rarely ever gets played that way. And am I missing any?
Well, there's organized play as well.
Aha.
Yes.
So is the meta different for organized play than it is for terrain control, say?
Yeah, that's the biggest or the biggest other question for me when you talk about the metagame is, are you talking about what we call pub games or public games? That's what it's short for. Or are you talking about organized games, which can take several different formats, including a normal terrain control game, but a little more focused and more sweaty, or what we call a single life drop in Mechwarrior parlance, or what might more commonly be called a deathmatch, where the dynamics in play are very different because there's no respawns, and you're basically only fighting one battle, and you need to make all of your armor and all of your damage count in that one battle instead of having many battles over many different areas.
Is that kind of like Counter-Strike or MechWarrior Online?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, organized play, like the name suggests, is organized, so it relies heavily on team working together, and often assets that just wouldn't use in pub game. They can shine in organized game for just synergies and stuff like that.
I know I said that we probably weren't going to break this down into different topics, but it might be good to break it down into each of the different game modes and what is meta in that game mode. And then I think we should probably dedicate an amount of time to each topic about equal to how much that game mode even really comes up in the community.
That'd be a sensible way of breaking things up.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Seeing as how it's the least played format, we should probably start with Test of Strength. What do you all know much about the meta for Test of Strength? I know just a little.
My understanding was that it was just only used for testing. Like, I've only ever seen it used on testing servers or as a way to, like, facilitate buying any asset if you're doing organized play.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Test of Strength is played frequently enough to have a defined metagame, because an important aspect of there being a metagame is the frequency with which choices are made, and knowing what people like to do. And Test of Strength is sort of an oddity because most of the time people are just messing around, either waiting for more players to come in to go somewhere else, a different game mode, or just learning the controls like new players.
I did forget to mention there is one other game mode, Last Man Standing, but I think I haven't played that since probably 2011 or something.
Yeah, I was about to say similar date. Like, I don't even remember last time I saw this mode used.
The last time that I played Test of Strength as a competitive sort of setup, and not like a just a do whatever you want sort of game mode.
Free play.
Yeah, free play. There you go. So instead of doing it free play, we were actually competing against each other, and we started at the 43,000 Seabill rank. And the thing about Test of Strength is that dealing damage using C3, using Angel electronic countermeasures, and things like that don't actually give you any Seabills. And so you aren't going to be able to upgrade your mech by selling it and using money you've accumulated during the level. So the only way to get a bigger mech is to rank up. And so that involves killing the enemy, shooting them, whatever, getting points, but it doesn't result in C-bills until you actually get another rank. Once you get another rank, you have to die and come and respawn, and that's when you can actually buy a bigger mech.
Yeah, the thing is, it's such a still rarely seen mode. It's even hard to discuss meta, I think.
Yeah, it's essentially not in common play,
And the
except
simple,
as a free play mode.
Yeah, the simple thing about what meta does develop during the game is that you always have to make sure to buy a mech, tank, or whatever you're using that is cheap enough that you can still afford your ammo. Because even if you run out of ammo, and even if there's ammo resupply points out in the map, you're going to have to spend the money that you started with. So if you're in an ammo-hungry asset, you're going to have a lot of money saved up from your rank, and so you have to buy way below your rank just to be able to deal with the ammo issues. And so I think laser mechs and things like that show up a little more often. But enough about that. That format's not real, so that game mode, nobody plays it. So
yeah, sadly. I think it's a shame. It's a shame. It could be interesting, but
I did play something very similar once when I remember Rick Hunter was messing with some of the servers, like messing with some sort of civil gain settings or rank settings, I think, and it did something similar where you just couldn't get any Seedles for any reason whatsoever, but you started with like 100,000. It was completely accidental. I remember this very, very clearly because it was on TSA Ocean, and it was just like you started with like 80k, and that was all you got, and nobody realized it until after they had made their first purchases. So,
what a good troll. Unintentional troll.
Fun map.
So I suppose the next least common game mode that comes up is Team Solaris Arena.
Oh, right, there exists a team variant, actually. I completely forgot about it.
I would argue for good reason. I'm sure as we get to talk a little bit more about the meta, then I can explain why. But yeah.
I know in my activities of writing on the wiki, I did some of the entry for LRM camping, and I decided to describe how to use LRM camping as a strategy both in terrain control and in Team Solaris Arena. And one of the things that I brought up is that, at least from my perspective as I've seen it, LRM camping is a lot more effective in Team Solaris Arena than it is in terrain control.
That's right, and you're hitting on precisely why people usually prefer terrain control over Team Solaris Arena. Because TSA, for short, not to be confused with the federal agency, is usually played in score mode instead of team tickets mode, which is what terrain control is usually played in. Now, if you're not familiar with these two game modes, score mode is basically anytime you're doing damage to the enemy team, your team's score goes up. And team ticket mode is you start with a high number and it goes down every time someone on your team dies or if your team is not controlling the objectives. So basically this creates an incentive for, in Team Solaris Arena, for your team to play as cowardly as possible, using indirect methods and avoiding as much damage as possible, because not allowing the enemy team to get score is actually what helps you.
So if they're playing so cowardly, how do they get kills?
It's less about kills, it's more just about chipping the damage that increases your score, right? And I believe that it still made a difference whether, what asset you use, right? So the heavier your mech is and you get shot, the more points enemy gets. I think that was still a thing.
Yes, I believe so too.
So yeah, often it would probably just like people stay on lighter mechs and just try to chip damage. It's not exactly fun, unless of course it's both teams that kind of agree not to do that sort of playstyle.
It's also, I have seen it played in ticket mode as well, where even though you don't get points for like doing damage either. It's only for kills, which also means that, like, for the same reason, you would just never want to expose yourself. You would want to constantly be using things that were like maybe jump snipey. Like, okay, you minimize your exposure and maximize your damage, but you just never want to die ever under any circumstances, which doesn't really make for very engaging gameplay, because it just means that everybody's constantly hiding. Whereas, like, train control, you actually get you are rewarded for going to different parts of the map and moving aggressively. Not really so for TSA. A single death would be enough to like make any push not worth it.
One of the things I found a number of years back when we had the Planetary League going, there were occasional Team Solaris Arena matches, And in these Team Solaris Arena matches, which they ended up becoming discontinued pretty quickly because when you have a competitive Team Solaris Arena match where both sides are on comms and following orders, and the sides are very organized, it ends up being very similar to a one life drop. But once the initial winner of that first confrontation is decided, it becomes very difficult for the other team to make any headway, because if even one player survives from the first conflict, if even only one player survives, then they can go back, repair, and then often upgrade to a medium mech, and they come back out, and the other team has 0 medium mechs and all light mechs, and they have a hard time handling the one medium mech on the other side, and each time the two teams clash, the team that was in the lead at the beginning is almost always the one that wins on the following conflict.
Yes, it lends itself to those type of snowball scenarios, much more so than terrain control, right? Because in terrain control, there's this dynamic where if you upgrade too much too early, you will inevitably have slower units, and you'll sacrifice your control of the map if you don't position yourself perfectly and take long-range weapons, and so on and so forth.
So with the meta of Team Solaris Arena, I mostly see Gauss rifles, LRMs, 360 torsos, so they can, like vultures and stuff, so they can run away while firing, that sort of thing.
Arrow 4s for days.
Yep.
All right, well, I mean, that's about how much Team Solaris Arena gets played, so I suppose we could switch on to the next most common format. That game mode would be Solaris Arena.
Yep, second most popular, actually, it would seem.
Probably.
I would say it's opposite to Team Solaris Arena. Devs don't matter as much, and the meta is basically, at least in my experience, you just grab something that dishes out the most damage it can in a short span of time. It doesn't matter if you will die, it's just about hitting people and hitting them as much as you can before you go down, rinse and repeat. That's how you win. Unless, of course, you're going for style points where you try to, survive for as long, go for as little deaths as possible and so on. But I don't think that's how we win.
There is some, I'm still not entirely sure how, the scoring system works in Solaris Arena. Because I know that occasionally, I've gotten a significantly higher, either significantly higher or significantly lower score than the person who has the highest score. But, if I have more deaths than the person who's below me or something, or if I have fewer deaths than the person at the top, I've still been declared the winner. So sometimes I do think it's you mostly want to go towards just okay, I want to dish out as much damage as possible, which is okay, stack tons of LBX, stack tons of UAC 10s and 20s. But
Streaks,
do be a little bit careful. Streaks too, yes. Love the D-streak, dual streak vulture on that game mode. So yeah, but it's partially just just put out all the damage, but also try not to die. Kind of just run around, get sneaky kills, get sneaky damage. But it's mostly damage.
I know that pretty frequently the kills, I think compared to a normal terrain control or Team Solaris Arena match, that Solaris Arena free-for-all matches favor kills a little more than those other game modes, and getting last hit.
Yeah, I would say that kills matter more than generally getting damage out, compared to terrain control or Solaris Arena, or Team Solaris Arena, I should say, right? Where in terrain control, if you're not getting kills, you're at the very least doing quote-unquote tempo damage to them. This is a fairly fresh concept that I just arrived on recently, but you'll be forcing them to go back to base and repair and not share their armor with their teammates at the same time necessarily, which is what you want in order to actually win a team fight. So, Solaris Arena, if you're doing damage, you're pumping up your team's score. That's the only thing you can do. Solaris Arena, on the other hand, is a free-for-all mode, and because Living Legends is designed around team play and combined arms, free-for-all kind of has some strange dynamics. I would say the metagame is a lot simpler because the optimal choices are much fewer and easier to identify. So, like one example, and also because of the economy differences. So, Free For All has a much faster economy. You can upgrade into bigger and more expensive things, and the starting money from the ranks is also a lot higher. So, like for one example is the awesome Bravo with Ultra AC-10s and medium pulse lasers. So many of those things in Solaris Arena because it's right at a particular buy tier, and it's basically the optimal intersection of armor and damage per second in the heavy assault area there.
I've noticed that with that awesome, at least in the other game modes, you either have to ask for 1,000 C-bills or head straight for the first forward base and hope that you can get 1,000 C-bills by the time you get there to rearm. Is that a problem in Solaris Arena as well? Do you have to sort of beeline for the ammo dump in the middle of the map?
Pretty sure I can afford ammo in Solaris. Not positive though.
Well,
Yeah,
it depends.
I think you do.
It depends on the variant. I don't know about the Awesome Bravo in particular, but it is always funny in a free-for-all game when ordinarily you'd be able to ask for spare money from your teammates. Well, I guess I'll go get some spare money by shooting at someone to refill my ammo. It's kind of what you have to do.
I'm still very, I don't know, whenever I play Solaris, I still kind of feel like I favor really mobile assets, because something that's another, a detail that wasn't mentioned about why last hits are really important is that you don't get assist money in Solaris. Like in terrain control, and I think probably in TSA, you get money even if you don't actually kill someone. If you, kill someone's arm,
That's true.
or if somebody else, gets the kill after you do, you get some kind of extra bonus for it. In Solaris, you get money for damaging people, and you get money for killing people, but if somebody else gets the kill, you don't get anything. So, I usually like to have something that is good at last hitting, that has, some kind of mid-range, or at least really bursty, main gun, so I can quickly kill somebody. I'm really, really fond of Shadowcats because they can run away, and they almost always have some really high alpha damage. Just kind of drop on somebody and then run off.
I know this is more of a tactical
Maximizing money.
consideration than a meta consideration, but I know that when I'm playing in Solaris Arena, very frequently there will be 3 mechs in one fight, me and 2 others, and whenever that sort of thing happens, I always shoot for the one that has the most armor currently, because I want them to fight each other for as long as possible, and to weaken each other,
Absolutely.
and then take them out as they get low. Otherwise, if I just focus on the one that's weakest from the beginning, and then I kill it, or the other guy kills it, then the remaining mech now has way more armor left than if I'd let that guy live for a little longer.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of the metagame of Solaris Arena that's particular to that game mode. Is I would say your success is dependent on how well you play that game of threat management, because especially if there's more than a few people on the server, you're going to walk into some, not just honorable 1v1s, right? So how do you survive that situation? How do you walk away with the kills? Particularly because if you don't walk away with the kills, you don't walk away with much at all, as Direwolf already explained. So there's usually this unspoken rule that the 2 weaker opponents of the 3 have to fight the third, and then, if there's suddenly a change in power, usually there's a change in alliances, and no one communicates, just everyone understands these rules. And then most of the time. So there's funny things that happen sometimes, right, where someone who's not really aware of these dynamics gets mixed up in one of these, and then you can play around that person. Like, maybe you can play a mind game with number 3 and get them to shoot at that person, and that person to shoot at them and not switch on you, right?
It's
Or
like when the
things like that.
When the Ultra Autocannon 20 Uller is shooting at my Warhammer when there's a Fafnir right in between us.
I know, and you're screaming at him.
That's the mood.
Shoot the Fafnir, damn you!
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Projecting my energy to please shoot the Fafnir is... I've been there.
Sometimes, of course, it can also lead to my favorites, where, you try to do what Kentax described, and then they just both decide to turn at you for no reason. I'm just a third participant, don't mind me. But another thing is that if you're actually one of the leading, if you're first place, second maybe, like they often also can stop fighting each other and start shooting at you instead if they realize that's leading person just tuning in into the combat. But
pretty sure you're worth more money like the higher you are on the scoreboard.
oh yeah,
or whatever
I think
higher
you
rank
are. Yeah.
So yeah, that's how it'd be.
But regarding what Leeko said, like I absolutely agree with him that things like the awesome with twin UAC 10s, it's like most common pick at the bracket for Solaris Arena. Just like in good old times, it was the Strick Mad Dog with what was it, to the SRM 6s and to the SRM 4s. That thing was, even if you could have afforded assault, you still picked that thing because of just how quickly you were able to kill people. Just on one-on-one combat.
And those that you can't kill quickly, well, they can't kill you very quickly at all because of all that screen shake.
Our current Streak Vulture is still very good in that game mode, and in general. Dual Streak 6s to MPLs to ER smalls.
Yeah, it's still good, but it's
stupidly up-armored.
It's not the same.
Yeah. But it's very silly.
So yeah, I guess just pick your fights, try to get the kills, try not to get shot too much, but yeah, just dish out the damage, dish out the kills, still kill if possible.
People like to joke that Solaris Arena is all about stealing kills, but really it's about the threat management and the mind games. There's fun to be had. It's very chaotic.
Also mobility, so that way if somebody does start to focus you, you can just yeet out and force them to shoot at each other. Love jump jets and love mask in that game mode.
Yeah, and then you realize that they're chasing after you anyways.
Exposing their rear torso to your other enemy.
Ideally.
That's true.
So you were all talking about these high burst damage weapons like the LBXs and things like Ultra Autocannon 20s. How come long range weapons don't really come into play in Solaris Arena?
Well, part of that is map design. Solaris Arena maps are generally not designed for long-range engagements. There's a couple exceptions, but they tend to be pretty brawl-focused, as we like to say. And part of that is also because having the highest damage per second output in a fight is going to give you the best chance of getting kills, unless you're very, very good at hiding and peeking, which basically just leaves you vulnerable to getting rushed. So
yeah, like things like long tom or arrows don't really have place there. Sure, you can try and meme with them, but like you're a free kill if someone's pounds relatively close to you and spots you and just runs at you.
Yeah. Ordinarily,
go on.
Ordinarily, if you wanted to use weapons like Gauss rifles or, Ultra AC2s, stuff like that, your long-range weapons, you'd have teammates to back you up and sort of hide behind if you really needed to. But in a free-for-all, anyone can just rush you. So, higher DPS wins.
I'd still say that Clan Neo PPCs and Gauss rifles are still very, very good in Solaris if you are able to, if you know the map well enough where you can be like, okay, these are places where I can probably see where people are going to be if they're coming at me. Also just because Gauss rifles are really strong no matter where you are. You're going to have lower DPS than somebody else around you. But if you're good at managing your exposure and your damage, you can just kind of fade in and out behind cover. For example, the Thor Echo with 2 Clan Neo PPCs and the Gauss rifle or a Gauss Vulture. Those will still all be very good picks. Even on relatively smaller maps like Glory.
Yeah, I actually sorry, go.
Go ahead. Yes, you go.
Okay, I actually wanted to touch the subject of Gauss rifles, in particular on Solaris Arena. Obviously Gauss is great, but it plays to that side of Solaris where you just play opportunistically with the Gauss, right? Especially with the Mad Dog with twin Gauss rifles, you just skew around the sides of a map and just take a shots in the people fighting in. Just take advantage of that without much return fire. It's kind of like a skirmishing, just like you can use in TSA. You can also brawl with Gauss, just perfectly fine. It's just, your DPS output isn't as big as with Ultra Autocannons. But yeah, Gauss, PPC is still a very solid choice if you just don't want to face people directly 50 meters away from each other.
Yeah. Right. So it's not that long-range weapons have no place. It's just that they occupy a niche that requires a lot of effort. Success generally requires conditions that you have no control over. Like, are you the most proximate threat to another player? Are you the largest threat to that player? And both of the answers have to be no, or else they're going to rush you, and you'll wish you had picked a different weapon.
It sounds like with the close-range weapons, you will incidentally be in the right optimal range to use them, whereas with the longer-range weapons, you have to very actively position yourself to use them effectively.
Because what it comes down to is the only advantage of having an Alpha Strike weapon over a DPS weapon in an abstract situation where two mechs or whatever are trying to kill each other is you can shoot and then fade and avoid damage while your weapons recharge. And in most of these clean 1v1 situations, that's not really going to happen without any teammates to stop them from getting close to you.
Better putting your damage down in the right places, and making sure that you do it before they get into their optimal weapons range. But yeah, that's really hard for players. Yeah, pretty much that too.
Well, I think
strategical exploitation, however you want to call it.
We said quite a bit about Solaris Arena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think before we get to terrain control, probably organized play comes up a lot. So I know Direwolf, you're involved in that. What's the lowdown on that?
Oh, okay. So first, for anyone who might not know, I help run currently the only active or regular single events. So come every weekend. There's at least one usually. But basically, the way the meta works there is that because there's only one life, there's no repair cycles, things like this. Every single shot, every single engagement counts a lot. It's hard to say if there's a single meta for it really, other than in terms of what types of weapons are used, because there it really depends on the map. It's okay, if the map has really long sight lines, then you're probably going to have lots of 900 meter stuff or ERATMs or LRMs maybe, but it also depends on on the players, on what their strengths are and what kind of assets they can take. I'm just I'm trying to think of a specific thing, but it's really map dependent mostly. And mostly I think if I have to choose, okay, what characterizes maps, it's about sightlines. It's about how long, if you're standing in any given part of the map, how far away can you see other parts of the map? And how much range do you have to cover to get to a place where you have cover, for example. So if you're on Oasis, say, where you have tons of 1,000 meter sightlines, and there's not too many places, you have to spend 10 minutes going around the edge of the map if you want to effectively flank. When a team if a team sits on a hill, then you're probably going to want to have a list with lots of long range weapons, or if you're not going to go for really long range weapons, and with a ton of laser anti-missile systems to deal with LRMs, things like that. And if you're on a map like Bogs, say, where you don't have that many long sightlines, and it's all about manipulating cover, you're probably going to do really well if you take tons of LBX, tons of tanks, things with lots of armor, lots of pot space, that kind of thing. That's my general understanding of it, and I'm sure there's tons of other ways of formulating this. I'd love to hear what Kidzin and Leeko have to say.
The thing is, I don't really have much experience with the current iteration of your competitive play, right? I don't think I participated in a single one. I'm from Chaos Marches era, which would be whole topic. Probably all the modes combined wouldn't take as much talking as Duelist Chaos March, right?
Yeah.
To break down. But
CM had its own dynamics.
Yeah, but since it's not actively run thing, probably we shouldn't be discussing Chaos March, right?
Yeah,
but yeah, I just agree with Bill Direwolf on that. It makes sense. That's how would I see you guys play your competitive mode. I probably should hop on sometimes to see it on my own, but yeah.
Yeah, you should check them out.
Would be cool.
They're good fun. But yeah, so the one defining feature of the metagame in organized play, as I see it, for the last year or so, has definitely been... so I should probably back up a little to explain a concept for the audience here. So if you don't play a lot of Battletech or Mechwarrior games, everything in this setting, all the units basically exist on a triangular space where one point is maneuverability, one point is armor, and the third point is firepower. And if you're at the maximum of one of them, you're sacrificing the other two. And most things in Mechwarrior Living Legends are two of those and not the third. So in organized play, the metagame that I see is almost always maximize armor first and then firepower second. And that's specifically because of the format where every little bit of damage and every amount of damage that you can soak up or avoid counts, and that is all that counts. There's no objectives other than deal damage, avoid damage, be the last one standing, destroy the enemy. So that's really all there is to it. And now the beautiful thing about the format is that you can find a lot of ways to do that. So, you can go with the old Chaos March stratagem of get lots of Gauss rifles or a spotter and a whole crap ton of missiles and park yourself on a really nice hill. Or, you can get a drop list that has overwhelming firepower and try to plot a route around the map where you can run into the enemy almost or already within your weapons range and smash them before they can react or figure out what happens. And those are two totally different and even opposite approaches. But where I see similarity is you almost always see people picking the maximum armor that they can. Like, for example, because this format is usually C-bill based in its current incarnation, a Warhammer costs, the cheapest Warhammer costs about as much as the most expensive Puma, which are respectively a 70 and 35 ton mech. So in organized play, you will never ever see someone take that Puma compared to the Warhammer, because the Warhammer is going to bring twice as much armor into play, even though it barely has any more firepower.
There are definitely some other types of, there are situations where people will take more specialized assets. Actually, I remember very distinctly, it was a Thunder Rift game which involved a Puma Prime, and we won very hard on that game because the idea was that because most of the list, they would still kind of mostly fit to kind of like maximizing armor. That sort of armor is almost always the best thing you can possibly choose. But there was more okay, we have a ton of armor already in our list, so we're going to have a specialist who is going to do something special that's a little bit harder for anybody else to do, and fill some unique utility and forces the enemy team to react in a certain way. So that time it was Denny, Donar Walker, a pretty good player, formerly a starter. I'm not sure what his current status is, but yeah, he was in our Puma Prime, and the rest of us were all in tanks with ACM right next to the enemy team. And the idea was that he took a position, kind of an Overwatch, a few hundred meters away, forcing the enemy team to okay, you are going to just take damage from me because I can outmaneuver all of your fairly fat assets, and just keep clicking at you, and you have to either keep rotating around the map, keep trading poorly until eventually the rest of my team with all of its tanks and LBX, etc., can just rush at you and kill you, or you commit early, which is also potentially a problem because do you really think that you can outfight the rest of my team? So, but still, mostly armor is the strongest and probably the simplest way to play. I've also seen a few other players the artist formerly known as Charles Leclerc, who goes by a million names, has played many times the Regulator Fox and done a simulator thing. Just kind of all right, he's the only person in a fast asset. The entire rest of the team is in really high firepower, really high armor assets, and either you deal with the big blob of enemies or you try and reposition around the Regulator, which is eating all of your back torsos, kind of thing.
I remember in the
Right.
old Chaos March that there were really common lists that didn't focus on armor, where they had lots and lots of maneuverable mechs. So you'd see 5 or 6 Black Lanterns and a Shadowcat or something. Do things like that happen in the current iteration of competitive gameplay?
Not very often. When it's happened, I don't think it's usually went very well if you significantly underbuy. Because actually, I didn't mention this too much. Leeko alluded to it, but yeah, the core of the format that I currently run is that assignments are based around C-bills. As in, teams or individuals are given, okay, here's a random amount of... Everybody gets, a random amount of money. It's okay, here, this person has 90,000 C-bills, this person has 80, this person has 65, whatever. So when you're, going by C-bills, the idea is you probably want to make the most out of that amount of money, if you're just kind of working individually. Which means that, okay, if I can buy, a Warhammer for, 70,000, or I can buy a Black Lantern, if you want to go with mobility, it requires a lot, the entire team usually has to take advantage of it somehow. Like either the person in that mobile asset has to be very good at managing aggro, like the aforementioned, like the one person, the Puma, or the one person, the Regulator, who are able to like constantly avoid dying and keep putting out their damage. Or maybe the whole team is like, going to go all in on this. That way they can constantly keep a long distance because they can't afford to ever get rushed because they'll lose if the other team has more armor and gun. So like just most of the time, what we see is people either going full on armor and tanks, or it'll be some like variation of like, okay, mostly firepower or mostly armor, and then with some specialists to kind of like mitigate that. It's a matter like list building tends to be a lot of like you choose one general approach and you commit to that mostly, but like just to make sure that you don't get hard countered, that like somebody doesn't take a kiting asset that can keep chipping you down, or something that just can like eat all of your firepower if you're something that's really mobile.
Right.
You always like have one or two other types of units that can help like add a bit more versatility to your list.
The meta game of list building and organized is something that I really enjoy, and that's one of those little things that tells me we're doing something right here in Living Legends with the balance, is that it almost kind of feels like a tabletop list building process where you're thinking about what you don't want to leave yourself vulnerable to while you're building around a coherent strategy. You always have to keep in mind counter plays and the map that you're playing on and everything like that. And there are a lot of constraints, but there are equally many possibilities.
Yep, I agree.
With organized play, I know in the past with Chaos March there were aircraft that were included when there were as long as there was a certain number of players on a map. What's it like with the current organized play?
So that's actually been a bit of a challenging bit for me. Because I do think that like aerospace have a really interesting place in single life. Like for example, there is also another set of single life, like an invitational single life event run by Carbonell, but not open to the public. So for there, aerospace are permitted when there's a certain number of players usually. But occasionally, like there are other. It's not only C-build restrictions that are put on some maps. Like sometimes it'll be like, okay, to make things more interesting, it'll be like, okay, here your team will have a slot for 60,000, 80,000, but then also a Thanatos and a Hewitt or something. So occasionally they'll just be kind of like, all right, no aircraft permitted just this time, or aircraft may be taken or must be taken. So I always think that like aircraft, like aerospace especially, add a lot of depth, because like it does mean that okay, if you're devoting a lot of C-builds to aerospace, or devoting tonnage to aerospace rather, it means that that's something that's not on the ground and that makes you more vulnerable to somebody on the ground hitting you. But okay, I'm kind of like getting a little bit ahead of myself here, because just let me first talk a little bit about kind of like how aerospace are currently handled. So in the format that I run, aerospace are not really permitted, at least not in the regular rule set, mostly because like aerospace are only piloted by like a pretty small subset of the Living Legends population, which also means that like if I were to, I want to like keep teams balanced most of the time. I want to have people to have fun. I don't want it to be like, oh, the other team can do all sorts of stuff that we can't, or they are all monumentally better than us or better coordinated, etc. So to that effect, it's really hard for me to like say, okay, aerospace are allowed when only like in a given weekend I may only have like one person in the whole group that actually knows how to fly aerospace effectively, or certain types of aerospace effectively. So I don't really want to make it so that like, okay, one team has an aerospace pilot, one doesn't. But like once
even if
go ahead.
Both teams have one, but one of them is like a god tier aerospace player who can absolutely dumpster the other.
Yeah,
that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, and also even if you can't fly aerospace, some people have a lot of trouble actually dealing with them, like kind of knowing, like, all right, when should we start looking at the aerospace and when should we like totally ignore it? Which is its own thing, and I guess we can talk about it once we get to terrain control. But yeah, in short, current format ASF are not permitted, like in the regular drops, unless like it's an exceptional situation where like I know there are good ASF pilots in both teams, and I'm like, all right, here you both have roughly the same restrictions, so you can do this. If there's a little bit more control over, like, ideally I would have aerospace permitted all the time, provided there are enough players, so it's not totally obnoxious, where it's like, oh, I need to have one person constantly looking at the sky. Then I would want that, but for now, it's just kind of like the only aerospace assets I allow are VTOLs, just because they're usually pretty cheap. And it also means that like if you're taking one, you're sacrificing tonnage on the ground, and it can potentially inhibit the way your team functions. It's an interesting choice though if you like want to have really, really good sensor coverage, or you want to have like some way of finishing off targets when your team is really slow or something like that. But people don't usually do it.
So I heard Leeko mention that he likes the list building aspect of organized play, but what is the usual appeal? What's the appeal for most players that draws them to organized play?
Well, I would say organized play is the best Mechwarrior Living Legends experience that you can possibly get. Because when you have the entire team on a voice channel coordinating their actions together without the delay of, typing on your keyboard.
User disconnected from your channel.
He hit it a little bit too hard.
Perfect timing.
User was moved to your channel.
I typed on my keyboard for dramatic effect and disconnected myself with a hotkey. That was great.
I'm leaving that in.
So, great, excellent. Where was I? So you don't have to type at your teammates. You can just talk to them. And that alone elevates the level of play significantly. And it enables some more complex plays and just an overall higher level of coordination and a more pleasant experience. Because Mechwarrior Living Legends also has like an international player base. And I feel like participating in combat while also appropriately participating in team play using their keyboards may be challenging for a lot of people. So, it creates a lot of bridges there as well.
I felt that one. No, just joking.
So yeah, I would just say that it's an elevated level of play compared to a public, non-organized lobby.
Yeah, absolutely. Leeko's right. It's the best experience if someone decides to just give it a shot, and of course it can be daunting for new players. I think that's the main problem, because they might not know maps, they might not know mechs, they might not know people. So it seems like kind of closed environment, like kind of elitistic and whatnot. But yeah, if you give it a shot, it's definitely the closest the best games come out of the organized play.
Yeah, and you learn a ton by like osmosis.
Yeah, you learn.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to mention is I've tried to coach a lot of people through the learning curve of Mechwarrior Living Legends over the years, and I found that just dumping people right into organized play actually seems to be the best way to teach, because that way you don't actually have to explain anything. A new player can actually just kind of see how everyone behaves when they're completely on top of their game at peak performance, right? And they can kind of see all those complex dynamics in play and actually understand things that might otherwise go unspoken between advanced players in a public lobby.
So I would cover organized terrain control, but without having first introduced terrain control in pub games, it would be kind of weird. So I think we're going to move on to pub games first.
Right. All right. Well, we can compare and contrast organized versus pub games when we talk about terrain control in general.
Okay, so that conversation on terrain control is going to go pretty long. So we're going to end this one here, and we'll pick the other one back up next week. I'd like to give a shout out to Timothy Seals for our intro music, and Shivoxy for our closing music. This has been Returning to Base, a Mechwarrior Living Legends podcast. We hope you join us next time.